Hi, Pam. All right, great. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to be right back. Just gonna grab a couple more sheets. All right, great. We got. All right. So why don't we just go ahead and get started then, since I'll just keep admitting people in as they come in, and we'll go from there. Uh, and I'm just going to continuously keep hitting admit because we have a lot of people coming in. So thanks so much for coming in and joining Stephanie and I. And I have to give a huge shout out to Stephanie for helping us with this because she's so good with the forms, understands them well, and as you guys saw when we did our presentation last week, she's just really good at really drilling down and seeing how we utilize these. So I don't know, Stephanie, do you want to say anything before we get started?
No, I want to say hello to everybody and thank you for having me. And now you just made me extremely nervous, but that's good.
No, not at all, not at all. So Stephanie is the managing broker for Park Ridge as well as for Arlington Heights. She's really, really good. Has been doing this for a long, long time, probably maybe longer than any other managing broker in a certain sense. Is that fair?
Maybe one of the longest. I've been
Yeah.
a managing broker for 15 years. So yeah.
And probably some of you may even know her from CB days for the CB XSC agents that are here in the office, like Eve. Eve definitely knows her.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. And then I did explain to Stephanie that the way we work in Winnetka is that we do all of our presentations through interpretive dance. So she's ready with words on how to explain the form.
That's right.
Yeah. So, all right. Quick question for everybody. And we were talking about just this is a lot more informal than the presentations that were done before. And everyone is muted right now, so it's gonna, you can unmute if you'd like. But really, the first part we wanted to talk about was any initial top line questions that you wanted to talk to. First, sorry, I'm just having some strange ones coming in. So we've got, it looks like the Chamber of Commerce. There's some people coming in. So we got some unusual attendees, but that's all good. So, and Amy Core is on board too. So Amy, I don't know if you want to say hi. Kiki's here. There's Leslie. So there she is. Everyone say hi.
Hi. I just want to see how this is all going. So I'm just here for the ride.
Awesome. Yeah, and we've got some. I think Jorge is here. We've got some real power behind everyone on the call. So that's great. So first question though was maybe what we'll do is we'll break it down into three sections. One was the listing agreement, which seems to be the easiest of all of them first. Has everyone had a chance to look at those? Mike Nielsen, I know you probably have. Have you looked at it?
There have been a lot of emails. So yes, I've looked at it a few times.
Well, look at how cute.
Okay, great. Okay, good. Susan says yes. Let's just start with the questions first though, because it strikes me, and Stephanie, pipe in if you think this is true, but it strikes me that this is the easiest of all of them. In a sense, basically the only thing that changed fundamentally was that we've got what our listing agreement, or what our fee is going to be with regards to our commission or compensation, which I like better now. Vic Sobin turned me onto that word. And then the other was having it broken out on what we're going to pay the co-op fee being. Then under financing, when we look at a compensation, which is section 4, all of the financing that basically all the parts that take place with compensation now are A through F, I believe, F or G. and they're all just sort of organized slightly differently. But other than that, there weren't too many changes. Has anyone utilized it already? Because I've seen one come through. Has anyone had to use it? Or any questions on it? And
I've used it, but I did have a question just in reading for preparing for the meeting.
please.
And that was on the compensation paragraph C. And it was really my own question regarding the bold part A. There's no legal or other requirements that owner agree to pay a broker commission, a buyer broker commission.
That's right.
And so it hasn't come up, but the thought in my head is that in this listing presentation that somebody could ask them, I don't want to pay them. I
Yep.
don't want to do it. So just curious if anybody's bumped into that and
I think that's,
what they might say.
yes, thanks, Brent. I think that's the number one question that everybody's been having is what happens if I go to do my presentation? And I'm just going to put it out there. And I'm charging at least 5%, hopefully 6% or 7%. And as I'm going through this, they find out they don't have to pay anything on the other side. So they say, well, then why don't I just do 0 on that side and I'll pay you 2.5 or 3 or 4? Like how do I handle a situation like that? That's probably the number one fear that all of us have. I don't know, Stephanie, if you agree with that or if that's what you've heard.
Yeah, so some of the feedback that I've gotten from agents who have used this listing agreement already has been overwhelmingly the majority.
Is she frozen? Yeah. Steph,
Yeah.
you're frozen, just letting you know. Oh, she might not be able to tell us that. But it was really, really good feedback that she got from her agents. I'll just fill that in for her. No, I think the biggest question is going to be what happens when I do go into a listing agreement and they find out that they don't have to pay anything on the other side. The one thing is that's true about this, because this whole lawsuit is about transparency more than anything else. So they've always had that option, right? The big change that took place at Emerald about a month ago when we all heard about it was that they could utilize it went all the way down to $1 for the compensation on the other side. Nobody was doing that, but it was always a possibility and always an availability. Now Emerald has moved it to $0 just to show that we're not even colluding in the sense that everybody has to pay at least $1 on the other side. So what are some things you've done when you've come up against it, when someone's trying to say that they don't want to pay 5%? It's almost similar to me in my mind that they're saying, I don't want to pay 5% because Joe Schmo down the street is going to do it for 4. How do we handle that? Does anyone want to pipe in on that, or I can? Don't be shy. I know you guys personally.
We all agree we want you to do it.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so basically it's the same. It's very similar to the situation when you're up against a broker who's going to be charging a lot less. That we provide a lot of service for what we do. We are not, we have to be careful about saying we're not a discount broker. That's some new wording that we just have to be careful about, that we're not talking about collusion, but our policy is that we're providing you the best services that we do. And a lot of times what I used to do as an agent, and I know a lot of you do it, is we're very familiar with what our own numbers are. And if my list price to sales price ratio is higher than the average, this is another reason to pull that out and talk about the fact that you're actually going to be making more with me through the whole process. Our company policy is that we don't charge under 5%, and that's very different than saying we will not pay another side, or we're going to pay the other side at a particular fee or collusion. It's our policy as a company to set our prices. Every company could do that. You also, on the other side of it, when you look at it as being a buyer's broker, nobody can make somebody work for free. So if they're offering 0% on the other side, there's no company in the world or no industry in the world where they're saying, well, you still must, do this, present this house and go that route. Because no one can make you pay, work for free. But so far we'll see what happens. Has anyone seen anything below 2.5? Besides builders and besides, in the North Shore market, has anyone seen any co-op commissions below 2.5 or the 2.25 tiered commission for us?
Tom, I just checked this morning. There aren't any houses in Winnetka that are below that. There aren't any.
Yeah, so far, MRED, one of the things we were talking about at NASBAR was there's a couple reasons we don't want to publish it, because then it does seem like collusion. If MRED's going out and publishing how many people are going below 2.5, or, then it is an issue, right? But confidentially, and just everything we've been looking at, no one is taking this route. So it doesn't mean that somebody is not going to, and we need to be prepared for it, but it's just in general, I don't think we're going to see it very often, as much as we think somebody might. So anyone else want to add to that on how that works?
I'll just, if I could pipe in on, everybody, I think a lot of people know I came from Baird and Warner for a long time, but in all of our listing agreements, we had a section that outlined what the buyer's broker commission was. So, for me, I would just fill everything out beforehand and just explain, this is the total commission. This part of the commission would go to the buyer's broker. And then we just kind of moved along on our presentation. So it didn't become or it wasn't at that point, a huge talking point. Most people seem to understand it. It might now be more of a talking point, but I think people expect that we as buyers, brokers are also going to be paid.
Thank you for that. And Sally just said that's how it was at Caldwell. When I was at Berkshire up in Minnesota, it also was in our listing agreements, and it never really became much of an issue. One of the things that we want to be careful of if it does become an issue, because this is new for everyone, and I think let's be honest, because of all the news and because it's just on some people's minds now, because some of the headlines have been absolute clickbait. They haven't been actually accurate. Sometimes you look at them and it says we're overpaid, or, it's just trying to get views. And it's making me a little angry. I saw one on TikTok last night, because that's where I get all my information from now. And I feel like in that particular case, this guy was so far off that I felt compelled to write him, because it was just, it wasn't even accurate. So that's out there. We know that that's out there, and that's something we're going to have to deal with. So just being prepared to talk about it. If it was me, one of the ways I would approach it is just exactly like Sarah said, take them through, this is how we go through it. And then say, this isn't any different. We've always had the option to pay out co-ops at whatever we'd like to do. There is no difference at all. The difference is, now that we're talking about it more, if you do want to offer less, if you do want to go in and say, okay, this guy's bound and determined to do 2%, there's a couple ways to talk about it. One would be, I'm looking at, one thing we have to be careful is we can't say everybody does 2.5, and so that way we have to do it, because that truly is collusion. But what you can say is, I'm looking at the other houses that have sold in your price range, and in this area that we're doing, I'm giving you a price on your home. So that's part of my job, is to actually price your home properly. We've negotiated my commission. This is my compensation and what I'm worth in order to do this. And as your trusted advisor, I'm recommending that we do the 2.5, because that's what most homes have been doing on this. We don't want to be at a disadvantage when we go out to sell these houses. The one thing that's probably an advantage for us too right now is that the market is changing. Yes, there's been very little inventory and the sellers have a lot of control over what's going on. But as we know in our market, that isn't completely accurate with all houses. Not every house is selling right away, and not every house is, yes, Sally, a buyer's market will make this easier. And I think we're moving towards a more balanced market, the interest rates being where they're at, with the demand on houses not moving. I have a feeling it's going to become easier as we go down the road. But being prepared for that question, when somebody does say to you, I don't want to pay a broker commission on the other side, we need to be prepared to talk about why that's super important in order to make sure that we sell this home for the right price. And that's what I heard someone else say in the city in one of their meetings, which I thought was really interesting. They said, well, that's fine. We can do the 0%, but I'm going to tell you that they're probably going to have an addendum on their offer that states they want us to pay for that 2.5 on the other side. So it's almost like doing a radon test. You do a radon test and you get your positive results, and you could say, sure, I'm not going to touch the radon. However, now I have to disclose it. And the next buyer, that these people just walked away, but the next buyer is going to have to, you're going to deal with it again, because now they're going to be bringing it up and we're going to be paying for it either now or later. I mean, there's different ways. It's whatever you feel comfortable saying, but for those few times when it does happen, I just think it's important that we talk about it. Any other thoughts?
Hey, Tom, can I chime in? I came to listen, but I thought I'd chime in a little bit.
This is great.
Whoops. A couple things. I think just based on a couple of conversations I've had with agents, the default is, I know there's a lot of anxiety around it, and you're going to go in and you're going to think that they're going to be all over this opportunity to pay zero co-op, right? But the default is going to be that sellers are going to get it, especially in our markets. And they seem to, based on the conversations I've had with agents and their conversations with their sellers, people generally get it, the co-op part of it, right? So there's been very little or any really in terms of pushback. And what I tell my agents is like, we're always going to have those difficult clients. This is no different. It'll be those same people. It'll just be a slightly different conversation, but it's the same thing, right? So there's that piece. And then the other one is, I think you mentioned in terms of using comps and using sold listings, something someone did, which I think is really effective, is in addition to the CMA, almost as part of your CMA, bring active listings and what they're offering, right? And so then you're saying, here's the pricing, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, when we get to the co-op part of it, let's look at these 3 properties that you're going to be competing against directly. I mean, obviously in this market, there's not 3 properties you compete against, but let's look at these and what they're offering, right? They're all offering 2.5 or 2.25, whatever. And that could be part of the pricing conversation, really. So, and it worked really effectively with this agent I spoke to.
That's great.
That's it. Back to listening.
No, this is super good. You had your scoop yesterday, so I know you've got you had a viewpoint on what this is, and
it's later today. That's why I'm listening here.
Oh, good. So I just want to make sure everyone knows who Jorge is too, because you've seen him on emails. We've had presentations, but if you haven't met him, he's the managing broker for Glencoe, Highland Parking, and Bannockburn. So you'll see him around too. So I just want to make sure I introduced you. And we all see Mike Nilsson, who's from Proper Rate, and he's on board. So just wanted to make sure you had a chance to see everybody who was here.
Tom, I have a question.
Please.
Can you hear me? Sorry, it's Megan.
Oh, hi, Megan. Go ahead. Megan, are you there?
You're muted.
Oh, she's muted. I'm going to see if I can.
Hello again.
Hi, Stephanie. Welcome back.
That was the longest update out of the blue ever. But sorry about that. So
Oh,
sorry.
No, it's always how it works. I did that on my first meeting with Amy, I think. I had a little coverage. Hi, Megan. We can hear you.
Hi. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. I just had a question. If a seller really pushes back and says, I really don't want to pay that co-op commission, and then we advise them that, okay, well, we need to be prepared for an addendum to come during the offer period, and then they somehow agree to the addendum part, does that then come out of the 5% that we're getting, or is that like they're then paying 7.5%, or what does that look like overall?
So it doesn't change that's a great question. So it does not change our current structure. So we're doing at least 5%. It would come out of the commission that we're going to have as a minimum that's coming from that. So yes, they don't have to pay additional fee because they've already had a minimum of 5%, hopefully 6%. But that's where we're at. Does that make sense?
It does. And I guess my second follow-up question to that is, and I know it's early in the process, but in terms of if a seller, again, really pushes back, you kind of alluded to it and says, no, I'm really not paying. Why am I still paying you 5%? Do you think that other brokerages will still stick to their standard 5 and 6? And I know it's collusion and you can't really talk about it, but in terms of if you start having other brokerages out there who are like, okay, well, we will only do it for 2.5%, then I feel like that really skews it or changes the game. And is that just like a wait and see kind of thing? Or I don't know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the things that we think, especially on the North Shore, is that we are the largest, even combining everybody else behind us often in New Trier. It just depends on the day, on the month, but we're the largest certainly in the area. And if we were to lead with that, we would certainly change the whole market with it. It's almost like the tiered commissions, right? That happened a long time ago. We've all paid the price for it to a certain extent, meaning us as agents mostly. But there's really no reason for us to lead that or to go down that route. And it's also a little bit no different than there's always been these brokerages out there that'll charge, remember when Redfin was doing 1% listing fee, which wasn't exactly accurate because it was 1% listing fee, but 2.5 on the other side. And it didn't work for them, right? The margins are so slow, are so minor, and it doesn't seem like it, but they're so minor that it just makes it harder to continue to do operations like that. Then we noticed that they didn't gain market share at all, even with that deep discount in our area at all, shockingly. And then the second thing they did, then they came back and said, well, we'll do the 1% with the 2.5 payout as long as you're selling your house with us as well. So they had to have two ends of the deal. They made that clause add addition to it. That still didn't help them, and now they've done away with it completely. So you don't see the 1% fees out there anymore. So I just feel like chasing that down is not the right way to go. It is wait and see, because we're not discussing our fees with the other brokerage firms. But I would be surprised if they were able to make that happen for very long. There's always been discount brokers. Stephanie, I think you probably want to add to that.
Well, no, and I think that was a really good question, Megan, and obviously something that might come up, but I totally agree with Tom. I think our position has to be one of strength, one of first of all, we believe in what we do. We believe in our value that we bring to the client. We believe we are full service. So therefore we expect full compensation for the value that we bring. And so, but you're right. I guess you're going to wait and see. And I think, you know what, we've always had to deal with discount brokers, right? Even outside of Redfin, Remax, which I know isn't really that prevalent on the North Shore, but you probably, come across some Remax agents, and they oftentimes will discount their commission as well, or, some of the other like EXP and some of the other, brokers out there. So I think that we don't want to ever be the leader in devaluing what we bring to the table. And so I think that as a consumer, I know I don't have an issue paying for something if I really understand why I'm paying the amount I'm paying for it. So I think we just have to just really make sure, which all of you do a really good job of communicating your value. So it is kind of wait and see, and it's something that we might, it could be a challenge. We just have to be really prepared on how to overcome it.
I think, and then the last thing, and there's a couple questions here, but I think Stephanie hit on something that Amy has talked about too, and it's really about confidence. And so the more confident we are in how we talk about this, the more people are just going to go right through it. Just like Susan said earlier, that, basically, for the people that have been doing this all along, it's not been an issue. So it's the only thing that's really a change is going to be the amount of news that's going on about it, and kind of alleviating people's fears or understanding of what that news means. That it's really about being effective in our communications.
Hey, Tom, can I just say one thing? Sorry, I wasn't going to pipe in at all, but kind of to add to that, and it's one of the things we talk a lot about in getting what you're worth. And it's like, we kind of call it, and we talk about it in the perfect listing presentation, but it's also, I think what we have to do in this situation is kind of like lean into the client and be really okay with them asking lots of questions. I think confidence comes when you say, I'm really glad that you asked about this, let's talk about it. And when you're really comfortable, because a lot of times they'll make kind of the right decision if they feel like they've got all the information and they've got some options, but you're also just helping them through what's the best option for them in order to create success, right? Because they can get stuck on the commission, but at the end of the day, it's really about what they're going to net, right? So I think sometimes shifting the dialogue too about, that being part of your goal, but I think being really confident and when they're asking questions, not being defensive. I think that has been the biggest dynamic for agents as they've shifted into it. So just something to keep in mind, like when you get nervous and they ask a tough question, by saying like, that's such a great question, I'm so glad you asked, even if you hate that they did, it kind of changes the dynamic. So sorry, that's all I was going to add.
So Susan, thank you, Amy. That was great. Susan brought up a good point at the end. She just said comps are offering compensation seems to be the most effective tool to sellers' pushback on compensation. So, and what I was thinking when Jorge was talking about that was just being prepared for it. I don't think I would lead with it, but just have those in your pocket in case somebody does ask about it. And then the other part was, in addition, should we show sellers the EBA? I'm so glad EBA is taking off. It's super happy. Is the exclusive buyer broker agreement. Paragraph 5, to show the sellers that buyers will have the option not to see homes where buyers need to cover the compensation. And that is actually true. In fact, I checked with NASBAR too. That is not against our code of ethics to not show a house based on the compensation. I thought it was. I was really convinced that we had to show every house no matter what it was. It's the other way around, and it's something we don't talk about enough in this whole situation, is that we have to be very careful when it comes to discrimination policies and how we do it. So if it's your policy to show homes that offer a compensation that you feel is going to be good for you, that's great. You just have to do it with everybody. So that's the difference, right? So it's still within the code of ethics to say my policy is not to show, my personal business policy is to not show homes that are not going to be giving me the compensation unless you're going to be paying it. But it can't be based on any other reason. And then everyone has to be treated the exact same. If you're doing that with that, then it's even within the code of ethics that we currently have. So I was very surprised by that. I just thought that would not be how it netted out when it came to the end.
And I also think it's a good idea to show them the form, the EBA form, because that is part and parcel of everything that we need to talk about now. So I think that having a seller, and oftentimes your seller might be a buyer also, right? That I think is a good thing to show them this, because I think it helps kind of explain the situation and why the conversations have to be a little different now.
Yep, absolutely. So any other questions about this? And we might do another one of these because it's a big group and I want to make sure that we get through each of the forms. But any other questions about the listing agreement specifically? If you do, just know, oh, Mary, you said do another form? Okay. I think that's what you mean, Mary. So I just wanted to make sure that anybody had any questions. If you still have questions about it, please talk to me. You can talk to our front desk. Anybody can help you with this, but we want to make sure you feel comfortable with it. The listing agreement should be pretty easy to work with. Okay, let's do another one that's kind of easy. And this is the addendum to real estate, to residential real estate purchase contract. And this is the one that if, do another class. Okay, Mary, we'll do that too. And we have classes this whole week, by the way, 10 o'clock every day this week. We're doing them in person in the office. One Thursday is pretty full, but there's still room on Wednesday and Friday. So if you want to do that, we can work it out. Sheila says that it's easier to not offer the sliding scale to the co-op. That's true too. Yes. That gives a conversation on all of this. I would love it. This is just me personally. If this was an opportunity for us to start to get away from the sliding scale in general, because it is such a bad thing for us as agents. It's been one of the biggest things that's kicked us in the teeth, I think. And I think one of the things you can do at the very least, and I've noticed that some of the agents are already starting to do that with that properties, is just saying, if it's a multi-million-dollar product, I would say going with 5% on the first million and then 4% on everything else, rather than going any further at the very least. The other thing I've seen people doing after getting what you're worth is 4.5 on the first million, and 5.5 on the first million, 4.5 on the remainder. That's an additional significant amount of money, and if you go to getting what you're worth, you'll see just how much that is, and we could talk about it in the live meetings. But that people are already starting to do that, and I think that this is our opportunity actually to maybe even take the reins a little bit and kind of get a little bit more money for yourselves. It's kind of important. It doesn't happen in the western suburbs, and it doesn't happen in the city. So we're leaving money on the table, and it's pretty significant. Okay, any other questions on that? No. Okay, so talking about the
There's a hand. Does Megan have a question? I see her hands up.
Oh, sorry.
No, I don't think so. I don't know that I did that intentionally. If I did, sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So for the addendum, is everyone familiar with it? This is the addendum to residential real estate purchase contract. This would be in the unlikely event that you see a property that is under the 2.5% co-op commission or sliding scale if it's appropriate. It allows you to make an addendum. The big difference, and Stephanie is the expert on these, but I'm going to just take a stab and say the big difference between this is not between the two brokerages. Understand that this is the buyer adding an addendum to their purchase offer that's saying that we want the seller to kick in the amount that's going to be needed for the buyer to be able to pay their agent. So it is a seller concession fundamentally in a lot of ways, but it's like I said, those rare cases where that'll be needed. I do think it's also a huge opportunity where we're seeing some of the I saw someone, I think it was in I think it was in it wasn't Park Ridge, it was in Skokie, where somebody was offering 2%. This was before the whole thing was taking place. Candace, was that yours? I saw you nodding your head. But there was somebody offering 2%. This was way before the NAR thing. This would be a great form to actually even utilize that. So if you're seeing somebody on the other side that's offering below 2.5, that has really nothing to do with this. You could even attach this to this as long as you've got a buyer broker agreement. Stephanie, did you have anything to add to that?
No, are we gonna go into this? No, I agree with you. I think that this is actually relieves, I think, some of the angst about the commission when you're representing the buyer. So I really love that this form was developed. And you know, the reason that I'll just add this in here because Tom brought this up, but the reason it's got to be between the buyer and the seller is the realtors are not party to the sales contract. So that's why we as agents can't include our commission into the contract, into a sales contract. It has to be done between the buyer and the seller. So the actual parties to the contract. So this is the vehicle that allows us to do that. So I think that it's really, again, it's very easy, I think, to comprehend. It's very clean. It's short. It's one page. So it should be pretty easy to use.
Does anybody have any questions on it? We say it's easy, but we've looked at it a few times. Do you guys think it's easy?
I guess one of the biggest caveats to using this is that you must have the exclusive buyer agency agreement signed. It states that in here, that you do have that in place. So that's what you, as the buyer's representative is saying to the seller, that you do have this exclusive buyer agency agreement in place. And that is why you're using this particular addendum now. Does somebody have a question here that came through on this?
Yeah, there was a couple. So one person asked us to kind of read through it and go over it again, which is great. That's Mary. And then the other was saying, Sheila was saying it gives too many options. So I'm not totally sure I understand.
Well, it's either, yeah, I think in most cases, I would think that you're going to, when you fill this out, you're going to speak in terms of a percentage, right? Like you're asking for 2.5% if there's no buyer co-op offered, no compensation offered to the buyer agent, or if it's 2% and you're asking for 2.5 because that's the agreement you have with your buyer. But it does give an option in case you wanted to do a flat fee. So you're really only going to, and it says in here, you're going to choose one or the other. So you're either going to choose A or B. So you're either going to ask for an additional percentage or the entire percentage from the seller, or you would ask for a flat dollar amount. And I don't think most agents are probably going to use a flat dollar amount, but it does give you the option of doing it. And then the same for when we're talking about what the total compensation is going to look like.
Yeah, and the reason
oh, sorry.
Please.
I was just gonna ask, this is Sarah. So let's say I have a buyer and we go to buy a $800,000 house and the buyer's commission, the MLS is 1.5%. Am I saying in this form that I want an extra 1%, or am I putting 2.5% total on this? And am I putting that at A or C?
So that's a great question. That's what Stephanie was going to. So you're going to show what the difference is from the amount that they're offering to get to the 2.5 or what you have in your buyer broker agreement.
And is that where do you put that? Sorry.
The first one. So the first section is percentage of the purchase price of the contract, and then you can put that right in the, you're going to check the percentage or do the dollar amount, and then you'll say what the total is. So in other words, the first one is going to be 1.5% to get me to the 2.5, and then the total is the second amount for the total compensation of the buyer's broker to be 2.5%. So it's very, very clear. Does that make sense?
And also, Sarah, on line 4, that's where you would put what was offered in the MLS. So in your example, they offered 1.5%. Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yeah.
So on line number 4, you would say that the buyer acknowledges that seller has already offered 1.5%.
Okay.
In the multiple listing service. Then A, you're going to ask for another 1%. And
so
then
A is 1% then. So
right, A is going to be the difference of what you're going to ask for.
And I know this is silly. Is this like, am I putting a little 1 in this box here, or am I?
No, you're checking checking it off and then you're actually writing 1 next to the percentage sign symbol.
The little question or the little line fell off of there, but it has, there's a little section there where you could just put in the percentage.
Okay.
And then, sorry, go ahead, Stephanie. I know you're going to do section.
No, you were, just like you said before, then C would be a total of 2.5% of the purchase price in the contract.
Okay.
So you'll have 3
Yeah.
numbers there, and I loved how you just described that, Stephanie. So the number 4 is going to be buyer acknowledges that's what they offered. So that's the first number. The second number, A, is going to be the difference between the two. And then C is going to be the total amount we're asking for. So it's very, very clear. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mary, was that a good example? Marcus asked for an example of it. And I think that's pretty straight.
Would an example with numbers make it easier? Right?
You mean like $10,000 versus $25,000 like that?
Well, like the percentages, right? So let's say you sign a buyer's broker agreement for 2.5%, right? The co-op commission offered is 1.5. There's a difference of 1. So line under 4, line A, you would put 1% because you want to increase it by 1%. You want to increase the 1.5% by 1% to get to 2.5%. And then under line C, you would then put 2.5%.
Right.
So the 1.5 that's offered, plus
Yes.
the 1% that you want to increase it by would equal 2.5, which is the total compensation that you have in your buyer's broker agreement.
Right.
Is that right? Okay.
Yep, that's
I
right.
know some of us think in numbers, so I just wanted to throw that out there. It's
Yeah.
a little more straightforward.
Okay. All right, perfect. So we got that example twice. So that's great. Thanks, Jorge. So, all right. So, all right, cool. Anybody else on this forum? Does it make sense to everyone? Pam, you look adorable in your ski hat. Yeah. Okay, Mary says it looks good. Okay.
And I guess one thing I would like to say is we first saw, or one of the first forms like this that we saw was prepared by Main Street. And I think, does NASBAR have their own form now too, Tom?
No, they're working on it. They're going to
Okay.
one that's like
Yeah.
this.
My point is that I think we're not going to be the only ones using this, right? Because the individual boards are preparing their own. We happen to have our own branded version, which is great. But so I don't want anyone to think, oh gosh, no one else is going to be presenting this and they might not understand it. And the other thing too is, just like someone brought up before, I think it might have been Megan's question about do we show them the exclusive buyer agency agreement, or someone had asked that question. I think, you need to show your sellers this form as well. So again, just so they have a really complete picture of why we're having these conversations with them. So they understand potentially what could come, what might be presented to them when an offer comes in.
Yeah. Perfect. Leslie McGuire just asked, doesn't this have the potentially negative effect for buyers in a multiple offer situation? That is a very good question. Yes. That I can always count on you, Leslie, for the good ones, because the reality is it is going to be tough if we're in a multiple offer situation and you're asking the buyer to pay on the other side, of this. That's going to be part of the whole overall package, right? So you're going to, and Leslie has this great program where she is really, really organized. When she gets multiples on her house, she does this really great process of explaining everything in a really sort of emotionless, she takes all of that out of that and really explains logically what's happening with each offer. And that is going to be either a positive or a negative, depending on how you look at it. So, we're going to definitely have to keep that in mind during an offer on how, in a multiple offer situation, how far they want to be pushed on that.
And you know what, Tom, and I agree with that, but I also think it's like any other type of concession that's made in order to win in a multiple bid situation. You have some buyers who are willing to pick up all the closing costs for the seller, which again puts their offer, maybe makes their offer stand out from any of the other offers. or, you know, whatever it might be, you know, a free rent or rent back, you know, with no charge to stay in the house for the seller, you know, any of those concessions, you know, go into play when there's a multiple bid situation. And this certainly, you know, is probably going to be one that's going to creep into there. But just like with anything, you have to, when you're working with the buyer, you have to figure out how to be the most creative and really stand out, make your offer stand out. And maybe it would be worth it to your buyer to offer to pay your compensation rather than asking the seller to pay it, right? So it could go, I think it could go either way, right? It could help you win if you have a buyer that says, you know what, I'm going to pay you. I don't want the seller to pay you. So it can also help you win in a multiple bid.
And it's definitely one of those things that, you know, as Steffi was saying, it's going to be looking at the entire package. So closing costs, cash, closing date, you know, all the things that we do, rent backs, you know, all of those things. This just becomes one more lever in the whole toolkit that we have. And as listing agents, we're going to have to consider as well. There was another question that I thought was a really good one too. Do you think that we will start to see low compensation to buyer agents, knowing it can ultimately be used as a leverage on the deal? Kind of what, building on what we were just talking about. For example, lessen credits for trade of compensation. Lessen credits for trade of compensation. Does the addendum give them bargaining chip that can affect other negotiations deals? So kind of what we just talked about. This is where it goes really, and we can't stress this enough, and Stephanie said it, but you cannot utilize this document unless you have a buyer broker agreement. So, you know, it is critical that we have those when we're going out on our sides representing the buyers, that we have this in place, because then you are protecting, as Sally said, with the terms of your relationship and the compensation that you're going to be getting for the deal. So no, I don't think it's going to affect it from a perspective that, well, now we'll see people lowering, you know, their own deal now, their own compensation. However, and I hate when I see this, there are some agents that sometimes will kick in some of their commission to get a deal done. This is no different than that. It's now you're going to be going against you're a little bit more protected in the sense now you have a contract with someone saying this is what I'm going to be compensated at. If you choose to kick in your compensation for that, which I strongly disagree with on all levels, I mean, personally, but if you do choose to do that, that's unchanged. You can still, you know, do that. We don't participate in it, obviously, but I mean, I do think that's still an option for you. And it hasn't really changed our compensation in the fact that people could do that even before. There are some agents that do it, some don't, but it's still, you know, up to you on how that goes through. Can the agent compensation be included in the loan if the buyer is paying for it? This is a great question. And Mike, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but in our last office meeting, we did talk about the fact that buyer credit, seller, well, I'll let you do it because we talked about the credits that could be done.
Yeah, so, well, that's not good. So do you want to unmute me there and I will,
Well, you're muted and your camera's off.
yeah, it's because I'm in the conference room and we're getting a really bad echo, so we're trying to figure out how to unmute this.
All right, well, why don't we come back to that when they get that there, but the shorter answer is there's some things being worked on that will allow that to take place within certain percentages. The big question is going to be, will the home appraise out? Because, you know, but he'll take you through it because it was pretty creative to see what they were talking about.
Yeah, can you hear me now, Tom?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay, so are you talking about like what Dana talked about, which would be percentages that are allowed, or?
Yes.
Okay, so how I see it is you have let's kind of just talk through a scenario. You have a seller that says, we're gonna pay 2.5%. We have, and then a buyer is saying, well, I want to work with my agent, but I don't have the 2.5%, right? Is that the example? I think we talked through that as an example, Tom.
Sure, yeah, maybe a percentage thereof, yeah.
So then what you can do is you can raise the purchase price by that amount, because if the buyer doesn't have it, you want the buyer to buy the house still, right? And if they don't have 2.5% plus what's typically another 2% in closing costs, they might not have 4.5% in costs on top of their down payment. So what do they do then? at some point within the negotiations, you can go back to the seller and say, hey, we'd like to raise the price by 2.5%, raise the co-op commission to 2.5 on both sides, 5% total in this example. That is an option. Other options include credits, but those are going to be capped based on a certain percentage, and you probably won't get all of closing costs and all of the commissions covered if you go that route.
Does that make sense to everyone? Sissy, do you have a question?
No, thank you.
I thought your little light flashed up. So
I stirred. Sorry.
Yes.
I was stirring. Yeah, sorry.
Wait, I do have a question.
Yeah.
I thought Dana was saying something about you can only go up to 2% or something like that when you're doing this, or right? There was some specific percentage that you could go.
Yeah, Mike, do you want to go over that? Because it was actually based on the type of loan and the amount that was down, but how much you would put down.
Yeah, it's 2%, 3%, 6%, and 7%, if that's not complicated enough based on the loan product. So it's going to be buyer specific, and that's why rather than have your buyer capped as to the amount of the credit they could give, I would say that raising the price is better. And the first question that comes up in that situation is what Tom said. Well, what if it doesn't appraise? Well, on this call, it's pretty easy to know that we're talking to North Shore people where things are already being bought and sold at elevated levels. So you already have that issue. I highly doubt that the 2.5% add-on is going to be the reason for your issue in the appraisal situation. So what Dana was talking about to get back to, which we'll save it for, a marketing piece and something that's actually written specific for different loan products. She was talking about where the seller directly gives the buyer a closing cost credit. Am I correct, Tom?
That's exactly right. Yeah, and so we'll have some information out about that so that we can get around that. There may be some relief in that type of program for those particular cases. And again,
in that situation, really quick, Tom, again, back to the other option where they raise the price and then therefore raise the commission to pay in the example, the full 5%. A credit, I kind of picture if you have a seller that says, I'm not paying 5%, I'm paying 2.5%. Then going back to them to say, okay, can you now give our buyer a credit? It's like you're still stuck in the same position. So I think the credit is a little less of a viable option in my opinion, but we need to keep all options open at this point.
Mike, I have a question for you. In the lending world, I mean, are there really proactive conversations going on about how to potentially overcome this challenge?
There are about as many conversations and as new of conversations as we are having here, where there's a lot of where this is not officially in place, documenting things as you guys have gotten to over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I would say no, that hasn't happened yet, but I don't think Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and a whole lot of banks are going to make a whole lot of movement until something legal comes across that they have to.
Thank you.
Sure.
great. So we're not going to have the time that we need to go through the buyer broker agreement. So I'm going to reschedule another one for that because we really need to dig in on that one. Probably the most. It's the one that we're probably the least comfortable with, I would think, because we've had it for a long time. I know a lot of people have questions on it. When I was in Edina Realty, we had to have them. So when I first came to Chicago, I was very used to using them. I never had any problem getting them signed. It was just because I didn't know any better, and it was just part of our process, right? So sometimes that's actually to your advantage. The other thing is, if you look on Ad Academy before our next meeting, if you look at day 2 of the perfect buyer presentation, we go into a lot of detail on how to get the buyer broker agreement signed. This document that we have is not that much different from that. So in general, we'll go through the document, we're going to do that. But if you could look at that, it's day 2. It's with Amy and I. So of course it's really well done. And it's Stephanie, I'm always super shy in my meetings, just so you know. No, but we always have, but if you really do look at that, you will get an opportunity to see how to have a buyer broker meeting that I think is super effective, that takes you through how to get someone to sign it. And I never had a problem with anyone ever signing it. And there's a real gentle way to do it. Yeah, day two, Mary. So right now in the way it's on there, there's a day one and a day two, or two parts. So it might be part one, part two, but we had done that particular class over 2 days, and it's under perfect buyer presentation. The class is called Perfect Buyer Presentation. It's on Ad Academy, and you look at the part two part, and it's good to look at the whole thing, because part one is actually where we're going through the sort of the philosophy and how we get there. But part two is really just takes you through a buyer meeting and kind of what you're doing to make that work. So it's really helpful. Any other questions on this? I'm starting to lose some people. I know we said we would do it by 11. I want to be on time for you all. But is there any questions on the two documents we have so far? How are you feeling about it, just in general? Joe, you have a very happy face about this whole thing, so I just want to make sure you're okay.
Before I got cut off, so my computer could update, I was going to say some of the feedback that I've gotten from agents who have used the new listing agreement and spoken to sellers about it. There hasn't been pushback. Like, I haven't had one person come to me and say my seller adamantly refuses to pay the co-op, the buyer's co-op. And I think it's just because, you know, they understand, most sellers obviously really understand how we are compensated. If they've sold a house before and they've been a seller before, they certainly know that was how they handled the situation then. So I think, you know, probably you're not really going to run into too much pushback on this. But of course, we want to make sure that everybody is prepared so that you can have the conversations with everyone. But I think overall, it's kind of, I think it's going better than what people might have anticipated, what agents might have anticipated, maybe even like 4 weeks ago, you know, when the trial first started.
I agree. We had, and I can say this because she doesn't mind, but Susan Maman had a listing agreement that she was doing. Thanks for the claps, Julie Tag. Where she was actually going through and about to go through a listing presentation, take them through this material. We just went through it together once, and I'm happy to do that with anybody, and just so you have the confidence and you feel good about doing it. And she said that literally there was not a single question about it. They just went right through it and said, fine. And it was a sigh of relief, and now she feels comfortable talking about it. So I think it's that first time you do it is always a little bit strange, but once you've done it once or twice, it's going to feel really pretty natural. And for those people that are doing it anyway, I'm sorry, just real quick, is that when I was, like I said, with Edina Realty, we did this as part of our deal anyway. We had the listing agreement look just like this. We had a buyer broker agreement that was necessary. We didn't have any problems in the long run. It sounds like Sarah was doing it as well. Sorry, Stephanie.
I was just going to add one of my agents who, the very first time that she had the conversation with the seller about whether or not they wanted to pay a buyer broker commission, what she had said to them was, you remember when we bought this house, because she had actually sold them the house that she was now selling. She said, remember when you were a buyer, you didn't have to pay for my services. The seller paid for my services when you purchased this home. And so that's what's going to, what we're going to talk about now is whether or not you want to follow that same path, and whether or not you want to pay your buyer's co-op. And he said to her, you know, I just want to get my home sold. So yeah, of course, I totally understand. And I remember that, no, I didn't have to pay it when I bought the house. So I'm willing to pay it now because I want to get my home sold. So I think that overall, most consumers, probably clients, understand this, but you also bring up a good point, Tom, that, you know, license law said we've always had to discuss agency options, right, with our clients at the first meaningful meeting with them. And so I think now we just have to make sure that, you know, we're really doing it a little more explicitly, you know, going over what the options are with them and making sure that they have a clearer understanding of that. So you know, in many ways, nothing has really changed. The words have certainly changed, but the process and our obligations really hasn't changed much. So something to keep in mind as we move forward.
So thank you, Stephanie. So just real quick before we leave, I'd just love to hear from you guys too. How are you feeling about this? Where are you at with it before we hang up? And you can say whatever you feel. Are you feeling comfortable with it? Do you need more time with it? Are you going to be coming to the sessions that we've got throughout this week?
Tom, just
I
one
could just say, oh, sorry. Go
quick
ahead.
question. If are they going to, if the compensation changes during negotiation, is that going to show up on the closed sheet of the MLS?
What the total amount would have been? Yes. So in other words, are you saying what the final commission structure was?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Somebody else had a question too.
No question. I just was going to follow up since I had the initial question. When I did use the listing agreement, the new one, it didn't even come up. It wasn't an issue at all.
Okay, great.
Oh, great feedback. Thank you. What about the buyer, exclusive buyer agency agreement? Has anyone had one of the new ones signed yet?
That's a good question. Pam says, always good to have info ready for the conversations. So that's all good. You can be property specific to open the door.
Exactly right. Yeah. So what she's saying is, if you need to be specific on this exclusive buyer agency agreement, you can make it specific to that property. So if you don't maybe have an established relationship with the buyer and this is a little too much too soon kind of feel to it, you can make it specific for the property that you're going to show them to protect yourself. So that's Sally. Thank you. That was a good point to bring up. But you could also shorten the time period too, Tom, right?
Yeah, I could shorten the time frame. I did a try before you buy often, and that's in that presentation. But if you also, what I would do in my buyer rep meeting, and I know we're kind of going over now, and we'll have a specific meeting specifically on the buyer rep agreement again, because I think we need to dig into that. We haven't been able to do that today, but if you think about it, one of the best ways to do it was when I had my buyer rep meeting, I would go through all the forms. Here's what a contract looks like. Here's what the offer is going to look like. Here's how you get your money ready. Here's how you talk to your lender. Here's how you get ready with an attorney, how that works. So I would just take them through everything. It takes 30 minutes. And at the end of it, I would say, here's a buyer rep agreement. This is what we'll be signing at some point. But I don't want you to feel obligated to sign this today. What I'd like to do is put together our first buyer tour, and we're going to go out together. We're going to see homes. I'm going to show you how I approach the sales process. And if I've done this right, nobody has ever left me because I've said exactly what's going to be taking place. No other buyer rep is doing something this dramatic and this organized. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to bring this sheet with me again. And if you feel comfortable, we're going to sign this together. And then we'll start working together. If you don't feel comfortable signing it, then at that point, we'll just part ways and, we'll understand that wasn't the right fit for you, but I hope I will be, because I'm not going to work without one, and that's how I chose to do business, right? In the beginning, I got a little lazy at the end of it, but now if it was me again, I'd be doing this all over again. And I think it's a super soft way of showing your worth without making someone feel obligated to sign something before they know who you are. And it worked well for me. And that's kind of that process is on that class, so you can see it. Looks like there's one more comment and then yes, exactly, Stephanie. That's what Sally said.
Oh, thanks, Sally.
Okay, great. Any other questions, you guys? I'm available at any time. Stephanie is available. But if any questions you have on this as we're going through this, let us know. It's going to be where we are building the plane as it takes off down the runway. So we'll view this together and we'll continue to get you the information as we know it.
And thank you for having me today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That's valuable. She's the best.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the week, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.